Look around you right now, literally wherever you are. The device you're using to listen to this, the lights in your room, I mean, even the temperature of the air, the clothes you're wearing.
Yeah, none of it comes for free.
Exactly, absolutely. None of it exists without burning through this massive hidden budget of physical energy. We are just completely surrounded by this invisible lifeblood,
We
right?
really are, and we're largely blind to it.
Yeah, and yet the financial systems running our entire world are, well, functionally blind to it too. We measure our civilization's health in dollars and stock tickers, but, the physical universe really does not care about our spreadsheets.
It definitely doesn't. Thermodynamics doesn't care about the S&P 500.
Right. So today, we are equipping you with a hidden lens, a tool that scientists actually use to see the real physical cost of human existence. It's called net energy analysis.
And I promise you, once you understand how to look through this specific lens, the entire world is just going to look completely different to you.
It really is,
Yeah.
which is exactly why we are diving so deeply into this today. For this deep dive, we are jumping into a foundational, just incredibly comprehensive text. The full title is Net Energy Analysis, the State of the Art, edited by Louis Delanoy and David J. Murphy, and it's published by Routledge.
It's a fantastic compilation of the absolute cutting edge in this field.
It is. So our mission today is to pull back the curtain on this physical matrix. We're going to journey from the very basic equations of pulling resources out of the ground to the massive blind spots in global finance.
Yeah, and eventually we'll even see how these exact same rules of energy literally dictate the evolutionary success of apex predators in the ocean, which is just, it's wild.
It's completely mind-blowing. So we're going to cover a lot of ground today, but it all anchors back to this one central premise, right?
Right. The premise that a world is a physical system first and an economic system second.
Yeah.
If the physical system runs a deficit, I mean, the economic system collapses regardless of what central banks try to do about it.
So let's start at the very bedrock then. Before we can talk about, global power grids or the future of renewable energy, we really have to define what net energy actually means in the real world.
Because a lot of people just assume that, if we discover a new oil field or invent a new solar panel, that's just pure free energy magically added to the grid.
Right, like we just hit a jackpot.
Exactly. But that is the most common misconception. The universe has a incredibly strict accounting system. You have to spend energy to get energy.
It's inescapable.
It's an inescapable law. I mean, you have to burn hundreds of gallons of diesel fuel in a massive combine harvester just to harvest biofuels.
Oh, yeah.
Or you have to expend colossal amounts of electricity to melt silicon to manufacture a solar panel.
Oh.
Or pump highly pressurized fluids deep into the earth to fracture shale for oil.
So we have an income and we have an expense.
Exactly that.
Yep.
So the foundational equation of this entire field from chapter 1 of this book is breathtakingly simple.
Okay, lay it on me.
Net energy equals the energy returned minus the energy required. Whatever is left over after you've done all the hard physical work to extract and process the power that is your net energy.
So it's an absolute physical surplus.
Yes, exactly. A tangible amount of joules.
Okay, well, that makes intuitive sense. It is the physical profit. But as I was reading through this book, I noticed a huge emphasis on separating this concept of net energy from another famous acronym in the field, which is EROI.
Right, energy return on investment.
Yeah, EROI. So if net energy is the profit, what is EROI, and why are these scientists constantly arguing about the difference between the two?
Well, this distinction is where so many policy decisions just go completely off the rails.
Really? How so?
Well, while net energy is your absolute surplus, EROI is a ratio. So EROI equals the energy returned divided by the energy required. It is just a relative metric.
Okay, so it just tells you the efficiency of the extraction process, essentially.
Blissfully. It doesn't tell you how much energy you actually have in total.
Let me try to map this onto something every day, like, running a business, because I want to make sure I'm not confusing a ratio for an absolute amount.
Sure, go for it.
Let's say I open a boutique lemonade stand, and it costs me $1 in materials to make this highly artisanal cup of lemonade, and I sell it to you for $10. My profit margin is incredible, right?
A 10-to-1 return. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a massive EROI. Any investor would love that ratio.
Right. But I only have the physical capacity to squeeze and sell 2 cups of lemonade a day. So my absolute profit, my net energy, is only $18.
Which is practically nothing in the grand scheme of things.
Exactly. I have a world-class ratio, but I'm gonna get evicted because 18 bucks doesn't pay my rent.
Mm.
Now, contrast that with like a massive global grocery store chain.
Right, the volume model.
Yeah, they might operate on a razor-thin 2% profit margin, so the ERI is terrible compared to my lemonade stand.
Terribly inefficient by comparison, yeah.
Yeah, but because they move billions of products every single day, the absolute cash in the bank or the absolute net energy is enough to sustain a massive corporate empire.
That analogy perfectly captures the danger of chasing vanity metrics in the energy sector. It really does.
Vanity metrics? I like that.
Because a specific energy technology might have a massive EROI. Say it returns 100 units of energy for every 1 unit invested.
Sounds amazing on paper.
But if that technology relies on a rare earth mineral that is incredibly scarce, or if it can only function in a highly specific geographic location.
Like a certain type of geothermal vent that only exists in Iceland or something.
Exactly. Then it will only ever be deployed at a small scale. It's the artisanal lemonade stand of the energy grid.
So its contribution to the global net energy pool will be negligible, even if the ratio is amazing.
Negligible. Conversely, you might have a technology with a much more moderate ERY. Let's say it only returns 15 units of energy for every 1 unit invested.
Which doesn't sound as sexy.
It doesn't. But if that technology can be scaled massively, manufactured using abundant everyday materials, and deployed virtually anywhere on the planet, it generates a gargantuan absolute net energy surplus.
Because the volume is so high.
Exactly. That moderate EROI technology is what actually runs the world.
So if a government planner or like an institutional investor looks exclusively at EROI spreadsheets to determine which technologies to fund, they could make a massive mistake.
A fatal one, really.
They might accidentally defund the grocery store to invest in the lemonade stand, completely starving the civilization of the absolute calories it needs to actually survive.
That is the exact nightmare scenario outlined in the literature. Interpreting efficiency ratios without considering the physical scale of deployment is a massive risk.
Wow.
We can't just chase the highest EROI numbers. We need the sheer volume of absolute surplus to keep the hospitals running, the water treatment plants pumping, all of the global supply chains moving.
Which brings us to a really massive, glaring question I had while reading this book.
What's that?
If this concept of biophysical calories, of absolute net energy, is literally the bedrock of whether our civilization thrives or collapses, why on earth isn't this the primary lens of global economics?
A great question.
Like, why are we tracking the NASDAQ and the S&P 500 every minute of the day, but there is no ticker on CNBC showing our global energy surplus?
It is a profound historical disconnect. And to understand how we became so blind to the physical world, we have to look back at the roots of net energy analysis.
Okay, take us back.
Well, this book highlights a fascinating historical figure named Fred Cottrell. He wasn't a traditional economist.
What was he?
He was a sociologist, actually, but before that, he worked in the railroad industry.
Oh, that feels like a really important detail. The railroad industry is about as physical as it gets.
It changed everything about how he viewed the world. Because he worked on the railroads in the early to mid-20th century, he had a front row seat to the sheer physical reality of energy transition.
Seeing the coal actually move the trains.
Exactly. He saw the coal being shoveled, the water boiling to steam, the massive physical effort required just to move goods from point A to point B. And in 1955, he wrote this seminal book called Energy and Society.
What was his main argument in that?
Cottrell argued that human societies literally organize themselves around available energy.
Okay.
The complexity of a civilization, its arts, its sciences, its legal structures, global trade networks, all of it is entirely downstream of the energy surplus it can extract from its environment.
So like a hunter-gatherer society only extracts enough energy from foraging to maintain a small nomadic group. There's no extra energy to fund a standing army or a university.
Precisely. But once you discover agriculture, you get a bigger surplus, which buys you the ability to have people who don't farm at all.
Like blacksmiths or scribes or priests.
Yes, and when you discover coal, you get an even larger surplus, which buys you the Industrial Revolution, mass urbanization, and modern medicine.
So Cottrell is saying you cannot negotiate with this physical reality.
Right. If the energetic surplus shrinks, the society has to contract, simplify, or collapse.
But the economists of the 1950s didn't exactly jump on board with this highly physical view of the world, did they?
No, they largely ignored it. Economics, especially as it evolved into modern financial theory, became completely obsessed with monetary metrics.
Right.
Today, traditional finance relies almost exclusively on tools like net present value, or NPV, and the internal rate of return, IRR.
Can you break those down for a second? How do they work and why do they ignore the physics?
Sure, let's say you want to build a new oil well or a massive wind farm. A financial analyst will look at the expected future cash flows from selling that energy.
Okay.
They'll discount those future dollars back to their present value using an interest rate to see if the project is profitable in today's money. That is your net present value.
And if the NPV is positive, the project gets funded.
Exactly.
Okay, but wait. If I'm an investor, isn't that all I care about? If the math says I make more money than I spend, why should I care about the biophysical calories?
Because money is an illusion.
Wow. Okay, that's a strong statement.
Think about it, though. Money is essentially just a psychological claim on future energy. A dollar bill has no intrinsic ability to do work.
You can't eat it.
You cannot eat it. You cannot burn it to power a turbine. You hold that dollar because you believe someone else will trade you physical goods or services for it in the future.
And those goods and services require energy to exist?
Always. We can print as much money as we want in central banks.
Right.
We cannot print energy.
Oh, I see where this is going. The spreadsheet assumes the physical world will just always comply.
It assumes that inflation will behave, that supply chains will remain intact, and crucially, that the energy required to build and maintain the new project will always be readily available at a predictable monetary cost.
So monetary appraisal is completely blind to biophysical fragilities.
Completely blind.
So an analyst could look at a spreadsheet for a new, deep water offshore drilling rig. The spreadsheet says the MTV is fantastic because the projected price of oil is high. But the spreadsheet doesn't know that we have to drill 10,000 feet deeper than we did 20 years ago, through miles of solid rock, using fleets of diesel-burning ships just to keep the rig in place.
The spreadsheet just sees the dollar cost of the steel and the labor. It completely misses that the energy required to extract the energy is skyrocketing.
That's terrifying.
This is the macroeconomic trap. You cannot just treat energy as another commodity in a growth model like timber or coffee beans.
Because energy is the master resource. It's the prerequisite for all the other commodities.
Exactly. You need energy to harvest the timber and energy to roast and transport the coffee.
Right.
If the energy sector requires increasingly more energy just to sustain itself, which is what happens when we exhaust the easy-to-reach oil and have to move to tar sands or offshore wind, then the absolute surplus left over for the rest of society shrinks.
And the rest of society is what this book calls the dissipative sectors, right?
Yes, the dissipative sectors.
What exactly does that include?
They're everything that consumes energy but doesn't produce it. Healthcare, education, the arts, the tech industry, your local bakery.
Oh, wow.
If the energy sector is forced to consume 20% of our global energy budget just to keep the lights on, instead of the 5% it used to consume, that 15% difference has to come from somewhere.
So the dissipative sectors must shrink.
They have to. The math demands it.
That is legitimately terrifying. You could have a scenario where the stock market is hitting all-time highs, the financial models all show positive NPV, but the physical reality is that the civilization is slowly starving to death because the actual biophysical surplus is evaporating.
That is the exact blind spot this entire field of net energy analysis is trying to illuminate.
How do they propose we fix it?
To bridge this gap, researchers in the book propose a new decision-making framework, the eROI NPV matrix. They argue that you have to overlay both lenses.
How does that matrix work in practice?
It plots projects on a grid. So if a project has a great NPV, it makes lots of money, but a terrible eROI, it barely returns any physical energy. It might be a short-term financial winner, but is a long-term biophysical parasite on society.
Oh, like using massive amounts of fossil fuels to mine Bitcoin. Highly profitable in dollars, highly dissipative in physics.
The perfect example. Conversely, if a project has a great eROI, it produces a massive physical surplus, but a negative NPV, it loses money in our current market structure than we know it is physically viable, but our economic system is just failing to value it properly.
Right, which tells policymakers they need to step in with subsidies or carbon taxes to correct that market failure.
Exactly. You need both coordinates to know if a project actually benefits human survival.
Okay, so to fix this massive economic blind spot, scientists obviously had to build a very specific toolkit. But here's the problem with treating energy like a bank account. We aren't just looking at a final balance, are we?
No, we aren't.
We have to look at cash flow over time. And as the researchers in this book dug into this, they realized the basic EROI equation was way too simplistic to capture the reality of something as complex as a modern power grid.
It really was. A single static EROI number, say, telling you a wind turbine has an EROI of 20 over its 25-year lifespan is useful, but it masks the dynamic reality of how that infrastructure is actually built and deployed today.
So what did they add to the toolkit? How do scientists actually measure the real-time drain of, say, building millions of solar panels right now?
One of the most critical new metrics they developed, detailed in Chapter 5, is PROI, which stands for Power Return on Investment.
Power return on investment. Okay.
Remember, standard EROI is usually a lifetime metric. It looks at the total energy out over 3 decades, divided by the total energy in. PROI, on the other hand, is a flow-based annual metric. It compares the energy produced this year against the energy invested this year.
Why does measuring it annually change the picture so dramatically?
Because of growth rates. Think about the renewable energy sector right now. Wind power capacity is growing at around 30% a year globally.
That's fast.
And solar is growing at an astonishing 50 to 60% a year.
That's exponential growth.
It is. And to achieve that growth, we are pouring colossal amounts of physical energy into mining lithium, smelting aluminum, and manufacturing polysilicon right now in the present year.
Oh, I see the trap. Those new solar panels we build today won't instantly produce their lifetime energy returns.
Nope.
They take 20 or 30 years to pay back that massive upfront energetic investment.
Exactly. So if you only look at the standard lifetime EROI, you pat yourself on the back and say solar is doing great. It has a fantastic lifetime return.
Right.
But if you look at the PROI, the annual flow, you realize that because the industry is growing so aggressively, the entire solar sector might actually be a net consumer of energy today.
Wait, really?
Yes, it is pulling more biophysical calories out of the global grid to fuel its own manufacturing growth than it is currently contributing back in electricity.
We are swiping the societal energy credit card to build the future.
We are taking out a massive biophysical mortgage. A shift from device scale ERI to PROI is absolutely vital for policymakers. It explains why an energy transition can feel economically painful in the short term.
Because the transition itself requires an enormous upfront investment of our remaining fossil fuel surplus.
Exactly.
And PROI isn't the only new tool. This book also mentions ERR and EPBT. Let's unpack those quickly because they seem to address the financial parallels we talked about earlier.
Yeah, they do. ER stands for Energy Rate of Return. This is the biophysical equivalent of the Financial Internal Rate of Return, or IRR.
Okay, how does that work?
Instead of looking at when a project pays back its dollar investment, ERR evaluates how capital-intensive an energy investment is over time in purely physical terms. It helps compare the long-term compounding physical benefits of different infrastructures.
And EPBT?
Energy payback time. This is the simplest one to grasp, but incredibly important.
What does it measure?
It simply measures how many months or years a power plant has to operate before it generates the exact amount of energy it costs to build it.
Okay, that makes sense.
If a nuclear plant takes 10 years to build and requires millions of tons of concrete, its EPBT might be several years. A wind turbine, on the other hand, might pay back its energy debt in 6 months.
So we have this advanced toolkit. We have PROI for the annual flow, ERR for the rate of return, EPBT for the payback time.
Yeah.
But as I read through the source material, I realized there is a massive controversy brewing under the surface of all this math.
Oh, yes, the boundary debate.
Yes, and it all comes down to where you draw the line around a power plant.
The boundary problem is arguably the most fiercely debated topic in net energy analysis.
Why is it such a big deal?
Well, it sounds like a bureaucratic detail, but it can entirely change whether a technology looks like a savior or a scam.
Give me a real-world example. What do you mean by drawing a boundary?
Let's talk about self-use energy. An oil refinery is a massive, complex industrial facility. To distill crude oil into gasoline, it has to heat that oil to incredible temperatures.
Right.
Where does it get the heat? It takes a portion of the crude oil it just received, and it burns it right there on site to heat the distillation towers. It uses its own product to power its own process.
Which makes perfect sense from an engineering perspective.
Yeah.
Why ship in coal if you were sitting on an ocean of oil?
Exactly. But how do you account for that burned oil in the EROI math? Do you count it as an energy expense, an input? Or do you count it as energy produced, an output?
Oh, I see the problem.
The researchers in this book break this down into various methodologies, but the most important one to understand is what they call Case D.
Walk me through case D.
Case D defines a system boundary where the self-use energy never leaves the facility. It is entirely internal. It isn't imported from the external power grid, and it isn't exported to be sold to consumers. The mathematical rule for case D is strict but logical. If the energy never crosses the system boundary into the wider society, it should not be counted in the numerator as an output. And D, it should not be counted in the denominator as an input.
Let me test my understanding with an analogy, just to make sure I get it.
Go for it.
Say I have an apple orchard. I spend all day picking apples. During the day, to keep my energy up so I don't pass out, I eat 3 of the apples I've just picked.
Right.
When I go to the farmer's market, I don't count those 3 apples as part of my harvest to sell because they never made it to the market.
Yeah.
But I also don't count them as a financial expense because I didn't buy them from a grocery store. They were an internal process to keep the orchard running.
That is flawlessly case D. But here's where the math gets mangled. The text points out that past studies, even peer-reviewed ones, have inconsistently applied this logic. Researchers will often include the self-use energy in the denominator as an energy input, an expense, but they will fail to include it in the numerator as an output.
Wait, if you inflate the expenses without crediting the production, you artificially tank the EROI ratio.
You severely depress it. It makes the technology look significantly less efficient than it actually is.
Does that happen a lot?
Constantly. Someone might study a coal plant, draw the boundary loosely, mix up the self-use energy, and publish a paper saying the EROI is 8. Someone else looks at the exact same coal plant, draws the boundary strictly according to case D, and publishes an EROI of 15.
Wow. So if a policymaker is trying to compare a wind farm in Germany to an oil well in Texas, and they are reading 2 different studies using 2 different boundary definitions, they're comparing apples to bowling balls.
It is entirely useless. This is why the authors in this book advocate so forcefully for standardized reporting protocols.
It makes total sense.
The science of net energy is only as good as the strictness of its boundaries. Without a universal taxonomy, the metrics can be manipulated to fit any political or financial narrative.
Okay, so assuming we finally get all the scientists in a room and they agree on the boundaries, we hit another massive hurdle. And this one broke my brain a little bit when I was reading Chapter 8.
The quality of energy.
Yes, because it challenges a fundamental assumption I think we all have about energy. The assumption is that a calorie is a calorie, a joule is a joule. But according to the text, not all energy is created equal.
This is a profound conceptual leap. The idea that all energy is interchangeable is a very dangerous illusion.
How so?
Well, a barrel of oil in a sunny, windy day might contain the exact same raw quantity of joules, but they possess vastly different capacities to actually do useful work for a human society.
Which brings us to the concept of exergy. Exergy with an X. What is exergy, and how is it different from energy?
To understand exergy, we have to revisit high school physics specifically, the laws of thermodynamics.
Okay, dusting off the cobwebs.
The first law of thermodynamics tells us that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It is a conserved quantity, just changes forms.
Right.
But the second law of thermodynamics tells us about entropy. It dictates that every time you transform energy from one state to another, some of its quality, its concentration, its ability to do work, is irreversibly lost to the environment as waste heat.
So the raw amount of energy stays the same, but its usefulness degrades.
Yes, and exergy is the measure of that usefulness. Exergy is the maximum amount of physical work you can extract from a system as it moves toward equilibrium with its environment.
Okay, let's ground this. Let me use an analogy like diet and nutrition.
Perfect.
If I eat 1,000 calories of raw, refined white sugar, and the next day I eat 1,000 calories of a complex, balanced meal of proteins and fats, the first law of thermodynamics says I consume the exact same quantity of energy.
Correct.
But the exergy is totally different. The sugar causes an immediate spike and a crash. My body can't harness it to build muscle or sustain brain function over a 12-hour workday.
Right, it's low quality.
Exactly. The balanced meal, however, releases slowly, providing high-quality, usable energy to actually get work done. The raw quantity is identical. The exergy, the usefulness, is worlds apart.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. Now, apply that to the global power grid. Fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas are essentially millions of years of ancient sunlight compressed by planetary geology into a highly dense, chemically stable form.
So they have high exergy.
Incredibly high exergy.
Because they are dense and stored?
Dense, stored, and dispatchable. You can leave a lump of coal in the shed for 50 years and its exergy remains completely intact.
Right.
You can shovel it into a furnace on a freezing midnight in December, burn it at thousands of degrees, and spin a massive steel steam turbine exactly when the grid demands the power. It is energy that operates entirely on our schedule.
And how does that contrast with renewables under an exergy lens?
Well, over the last 20 years, the standard EROI of wind and solar, the raw quantity of energy they return, has skyrocketed.
We have better technology now.
Yeah, better materials, larger turbine blades, more efficient photovoltaic cells. But fundamentally, wind and sunlight have lower exergy.
Because they're spread out.
They're diffuse, spread out over vast geographic areas. And crucially, they are intermittent. The wind doesn't always blow. The sun sets every evening.
They operate on nature's schedule, not ours.
Precisely. Traditional ERI only measures the raw quantity, but extended exergy-based EROI measures the quality and the irreversibilities.
Meaning what?
Meaning how much potential work is lost just trying to capture and stabilize that energy.
So if we replace a high exergy coal plant with a lower exergy wind farm, we aren't just swapping one power source for another. We have to build a mountain of surrounding infrastructure just to force the wind to behave like the coal?
We do. We have to build massive lithium-ion battery banks to store the power for when the wind stops. Right. We have to build synchronous condensers to maintain the frequency of the grid, because wind turbines don't have the massive spinning mass of a steam turbine. We have to build thousands of miles of high-voltage transmission lines to move the power from where it's windy to where it's calm.
All of which costs massive amounts of physical energy to manufacture and install.
Yes. When you view the energy transition through an exergy lens, you realize the sheer biophysical magnitude of the challenge. We are trying to redesign the entire concept of the grid to accommodate a fuel source that behaves completely differently under the laws of physics.
Which perfectly sets up the climax of this deep dive. And this is where we really want to focus, especially on Chapter 9 of this book. What happens when we take these strict boundaries, these dynamic PROI flows, and this unforgiving exergy analysis, and apply it to the actual future of an entire continent's power grid?
This is where the theoretical modeling meets reality. The researchers in Chapter 9 conducted a massive macro-level modeling exercise focusing on the European power grid out to the year 2050. They wanted to calculate the system-wide EROI for a fully transitioned, carbon-neutral system.
And system-wide means they aren't just looking at the solar panel anymore.
No, not at all. System-wide EROI is the ultimate metric. It accounts for the perpetual evolution of the entire system's composition.
What all goes into that?
They integrated the energy costs of the generation capacity, the full load hours, which is how often a solar panel is actually producing max power given the physical lifetime of the technology, and most importantly, the massive energy drain of building balancing storage like batteries.
They are asking, what is the energy return of a civilization-scale grid?
Exactly.
And they modeled different scenarios to see how policy choices affect that final biophysical surplus. What were the scenarios?
They modeled two primary pathways to a 2050 carbon-neutral Europe. The first is what they call the independent scenario.
Okay, what does that look like?
In this model, regions or individual countries attempt the energy transition in isolation. They prioritize energy sovereignty and do not trade electricity across borders.
So Germany builds its own closed-loop grid, France builds its own, Spain builds its own. Every country is an island.
Exactly. And the findings from a thermodynamic perspective are brutal.
Really? How bad?
If regions attempt the transition in isolation, the system-wide EROI of the European grid drops to around 14 by 2050.
Why does isolation penalize the system so heavily?
Because weather is localized. Let's imagine a scenario in December in Germany. A massive high-pressure system parks over the country.
Okay.
The skies are cloudy, so solar is useless, and the air is dead calm, so the wind turbine stops spinning. This phenomenon is called a Dunkelflaut, a dark doldrums.
A Dunkelflaut. That sounds ominous. And if Germany is isolated, they can't cart power from anyone else.
Right. So to prevent the entire country from blacking out during a 2-week Dunkelflaut, Germany has to build an astronomical amount of redundant battery storage.
Just to sit there in case of emergency.
Yes. And they have to massively overbuild their wind and solar capacity just to capture enough trickle charge to survive the winter.
And building all those extra batteries and redundant turbines requires mining millions of tons of lithium, copper, and steel.
Yep.
The upfront energy cost is staggering, which drags the overall EROI down to 14.
You've got it perfectly. The redundancy kills the biophysical efficiency. Now, compare that to the second pathway, the interconnected scenario.
I assume that's the opposite.
In this model, Europe invests heavily in robust, long-distance, high-voltage, direct current transmission lines, linking all the regions together.
How does that change the physics?
It smooths out the weather.
Yeah.
If Germany is suffering a windless, cloudy week, it doesn't matter. The wind is howling offshore in the North Sea, the sun is shining brightly in southern Spain, and the massive hydroelectric dams in Norway are at full capacity.
By trading power across a continental scale, the grid basically acts as its own battery.
Because it's always windy or sunny somewhere.
Exactly.
The interconnecting system requires far less redundant overbuilding of local capacity and chemical battery storage. The physical energy saved by not having to mine and manufacture all those extra batteries allows the interconnected system-wide EROI to stabilize near 18 by 2050.
Okay, an EROI of 18 is definitely better than 14, but I have to push back here a little bit because this is the crux of the anxiety surrounding the energy transition.
Sure, what's the concern?
Historically, during the boom years of the 20th century, early fossil fuel discoveries like the Texas oil gushers had EROIs of 50, sometimes even 100 to 1.
Oh, absolutely.
The energy was virtually free, physically speaking. Is a system-wide EROI of 18, even in the best-case interconnected scenario, actually enough to run a highly complex, digital, AI-driven modern society? Because a drop from 100 to 18 sounds like a catastrophic downgrade.
It is a massive reduction in the gross surplus, yes. And this is exactly why ecological economists lose sleep at night. But this book provides vital context here.
What context?
According to extensive research cited in the text, there is a theoretical minimum threshold. The minimum deemed EROI required to maintain a modern, complex society.
Meaning a society that can support global supply chains, advanced healthcare, universities, the arts, rather than just subsistence farming.
Right. The minimum required for that is around 10.
So 10 is the biophysical floor. If we drop below 10, the dissipative sectors can't survive, and the societal fabric begins to unravel.
Precisely. Therefore, while a system-wide EROI of 18 in 2050 is substantially lower than the boom years of the 1950s, it remains comfortably above the danger zone of 10.
Ooh, okay.
The physics say a renewable-powered modern civilization is entirely possible, provided we manage the transition intelligently and prioritize interconnection.
But it leaves us with a much thinner margin of error. We don't have the luxury of wasting energy anymore.
We absolutely do not. And this is why the authors emphasize the need for rigorous modeling of heterogeneous global regions.
What do you mean by that?
Well, an interconnected Europe might hit 18. But what about the MENA region, the Middle East, and North Africa? They have incredible solar irradiation, but different grid challenges. Or what about SAARC, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, or the massive landmass of Eurasia?
Because their baselines are completely different. A solar panel in the Sahara produces vastly more absolute net energy than the exact same panel in London.
Yes, and we need robust, region-specific modeling to ensure that as developing economies build out their grids, they can also optimize their trade networks to stay well above that biophysical floor of 10.
Because bad systemic design in the developing world could trap billions of people in energy poverty simply due to thermodynamic inefficiency.
Exactly.
Okay, so we know the grid can survive physically if we build it right by 2050, but that's the destination. The journey is what worries me.
The transition phase.
Yeah. How does this massive global construction phase impact the everyday lives of the society paying for it today? Because we aren't living in 2050. We are in the trenches right now, mining the copper and pouring the concrete.
And that transition phase is arguably the most dangerous part of the journey. Chapters 10 and 11 explore this through the lens of societal EROI and dynamic mitigation pathways.
Okay.
And to really grasp the danger, you have to understand a concept called the energy cliff.
The energy cliff. It sounds ominous, and given everything we've talked about, I'm assuming it has to do with how fast society feels the pain of a dropping EROI.
Exactly. The relationship between EROI and the energy available to society is not linear. It is exponential.
Break that down for me.
Imagine you are standing at the top of a gentle slope that suddenly drops off into a vertical cliff. When EROI is very high, say it's at 100, society is at the top of the slope. The energy sector only needs 1% of the total energy produced to sustain itself. Society gets 99%.
Abundance.
Yeah.
Pure abundance.
Right. Now, let's say the EROI drops by half, from 100 down to 50. That sounds like a huge drop, right?
It does.
But mathematically, at an EROI of 50, the energy sector now consumes 2% of the energy. Society still gets 98%. The EROI dropped by 50 points, but society only lost 1% of its surplus. You don't even feel it.
You're just walking down a very gentle incline.
But as you move further down the slope, the math turns brutal. Let's look closer to the cliff edge.
Okay.
If ERI drops from 10 to 5, a drop of only 5 points, what happens? At 10, the energy sector consumes 10%. At 5, it consumes 20%.
Whoa! So a tiny 5-point drop suddenly vaporizes 10% of the entire civilization's available energy surplus.
Yes, and if EROI drops from 5 to 2, the energy sector is suddenly consuming 50% of all energy generated.
Mm,
The non-energy sectors are decimated. That is the energy cliff.
that's terrifying.
As you approach an ERI of 1, the amount of energy required to sustain the system spikes non-linearly toward infinity.
And as we transition the global grid today, we are deliberately driving down our immediate PROI to build solar panels and wind turbines. We are intentionally walking closer to the edge of the cliff to build a bridge to the other side.
That is the dynamic reality. We are in a phase of massive upfront energetic investment. We are pulling biophysical calories away from the dissipative sectors to build the infrastructure of tomorrow.
How does that actually feel to the average person, though?
This temporary drain on our societal surplus manifests in the real economy as inflation, supply chain bottlenecks, and just a pervasive feeling of economic friction.
Wow.
Even if GDP numbers look acceptable on paper, the physical metabolism of society is being heavily taxed.
We are essentially fasting while we do the backbreaking labor of planting the new harvest. We are going to be hungry for a while.
That is a very apt, visceral way to frame it. But before we get too pessimistic, the researchers introduce a crucial nuance that actually offers a lot of hope.
I could use some hope right now.
It revolves around the distinction between primary, final, and useful stages of energy.
I know those terms matter, but how do they change the math of the energy cliff?
Let's track a joule of energy from the Earth to its final purpose. Primary energy is the raw resource in its natural state. The crude oil deep underground, or the kinetic force of the wind.
Okay, that's primary.
Final energy is what gets delivered to your door after extraction and refining the refined gasoline at the pump or the electricity delivered to your home meter.
And useful energy?
Useful energy is the actual physical work performed that society cares about, the kinetic motion of your car tires turning on the pavement, or the lumens of light reading a book in your living room.
So there are thermodynamic losses at every single step of that chain.
Massive losses. And this is where the narrative around fossil fuels gets completely flipped on its head.
How so?
Historically, fossil fuels had incredible primary EROI. They were incredibly easy to pull out of the ground. But their useful stage energy return ratios have consistently been abysmal
Why is that?
because of terrible end-use efficiency. Let's look at the internal combustion engine in a standard gasoline car. You are taking a remarkably dense, high-exergy fluid gasoline, and you're literally exploding it inside a metal box.
Right, and it gets incredibly hot.
Heat is wasted exergy. An internal combustion engine is only about 20 to 30% efficient at converting the chemical energy of gasoline into the kinetic forward motion of the vehicle.
Wait, really? So 70 to 80% of the energy in that gallon of gas is just gone?
It is literally blown out the tailpipe as hot exhaust or radiated through the radiator as waste heat. It performs zero useful work for society.
Wow.
So while oil looks incredibly abundant at the primary stage, by the time it reaches the useful stage, the societal efficiency is shockingly poor.
Okay, so let's contrast that with the new system we are building, an electric vehicle powered by a wind turbine.
Exactly. The wind turbine might have a lower primary ERI than an old Texas oil gusher, requires a lot of upfront energy to build, but an electric motor in an EV doesn't rely on thousands of tiny explosions.
It uses electromagnetism.
Right. An electric motor is 80 to 90% efficient at converting electricity into kinetic motion. Furthermore, when you hit the brakes, regenerative braking captures the kinetic energy and puts it back into the battery.
So the electric car is vastly more efficient at the useful stage.
Precisely. It requires significantly less absolute energy to drive a mile in an EV than it does in a gas car.
That's fascinating.
If we only look at primary energy, the energy transition looks mathematically terrifying. But if we look at useful energy, the actual work society needs to survive, the math starts to balance out.
We can survive on a lower primary ROI if we drastically increase our end-use efficiency. We just have to stop wasting the calories we harvest.
That is the biophysical imperative of the 21st century.
Okay, my mind is thoroughly expanded on how thermodynamics apply to power grids, macroeconomics, and electric cars. But as I read the final chapters of this book, I realized the rules of net energy are not just engineering constraints, are they?
Not at all.
They are the fundamental laws governing all organized systems on this planet. Whether it's the food we eat, the laws we write, or the animals swimming in the ocean.
This is where the deep dive transcends engineering and really touches on the philosophy of life itself. The thermodynamic laws of net energy are truly universal.
The book charts these new frontiers brilliantly, I thought.
It does. Take agriculture, for instance, detailed in Chapter 12 by Enric Tello. Farming is, at its core, just humans attempting to optimize the net energy of photosynthesis.
We're just managing solar panels made of leaves.
Exactly. Tello contrasts two paradigms of managing these biological solar panels. On one side, you have traditional circular integrated organic farming. These systems focus on a high internal farm EROI, or FUROI,
How does a circular farm maintain a high internal EROI?
by relying on ecological synergies. The waste from the livestock is used to fertilize the crops. The crop rotation fixes nitrogen naturally in the soil. Pests are managed by encouraging natural predators.
So it's mostly self-contained.
The farm relies very little on external energy inputs. It sustains itself on the current solar flows it captures.
And the other paradigm is industrial linear farming, the massive monocultures we see today.
Right. Industrial farming produces massive, staggering yields. The absolute energy output of corn or wheat is huge. But to achieve that, it requires a torrential influx of external fossil energy subsidies.
Like what?
Synthetic nitrogen fertilizers are made using natural gas. Massive diesel tractors are required for tilling and harvesting. Pesticides are synthesized from petrochemicals.
So the industrial farm isn't actually capturing more solar energy, it's just laundering fossil fuels into food.
That is a brutally accurate way to phrase it. The FUROI, the internal energy return of industrial agriculture, is incredibly poor.
Wow.
Often, we are putting 10 calories of fossil fuel energy into the system to get 1 calorie of food out.
That is insane.
As fossil fuels become constrained, or as we are forced to decarbonize to survive climate change, this linear agricultural model faces a profound thermodynamic crisis.
We have to figure out how to transition our global food systems back toward higher internal EROI circular models.
But without starving the 8 billion people who currently rely on the industrial yield.
But it always comes back to managing the energetic surplus.
Always.
But food is physical. I can grasp that. What about the legal system? I was fascinated by Chapter 15 by Benoit Schmaltz on law. How on earth does the legal system, which is just words on paper, care about the laws of thermodynamics?
Because the law is fundamentally an operating system for allocating physical resources and managing human conflict over those resources. Schmaltz argues that the legal system must grapple with what he calls socio-metabolic regime shifts.
Let's unpack that jargon. Socio-metabolic regime shift. It sounds like a civilization undergoing puberty.
That's not far off. It is essentially a society transitioning from one foundational energy source to another, from wood to coal or from fossil fuels to renewables.
Okay, track.
Think about how law evolved over the last century. When a society discovers a massive high ERI energy source like oil, it is suddenly flush with abundance.
Right.
The legal framework evolves to manage that abundance. It focuses on property rights for rapid extraction, liability protections to encourage corporate risk-taking, and tax structures to distribute the massive surplus. The law assumes perpetual growth.
Because the energy surplus basically guarantees perpetual growth. But what happens when that surplus starts to shrink, or when burning it threatens the climate?
The legal operating system crashes.
Wow.
The law has to adapt to manage scarcity and triage. Schmaltz talks about a looming legal conflict, balancing EROI against EROC.
ERC, energy return on carbon.
Yes.
So how much physical work you get per ton of CO2 emitted.
Exactly. Historically, the law only cared about economic return. Now, as we face planetary limits, the legal code has to become thermodynamically aware.
It must increasingly penalize and restrict high carbon energy, even if that energy has a fantastically high EROI and generates massive economic wealth.
The law will have to mandate transitions to systems that might have a lower EROI, which will cause economic friction, but have a drastically better EROC, which ensures ecological survival.
You cannot legislate your way out of the laws of physics.
No, you can't. So the laws of man must align with them, or the society collapses into chaos.
The law has to become a tool for thermodynamic optimization. That is incredible. Okay, I saved the absolute best for last. You have to explain Chapter 17 by Timothy McWhirter on evolutionary biology.
Oh, this is a great one.
Because the concept of the equal fitness paradigm, and specifically the dichotomy between the shark and the tuna, it completely rewired how I view nature.
It is the absolute perfect capstone to everything we have discussed. McWhirter synthesizes how thermodynamic logic applies not just to power grids or farms, but to life itself over deep time.
We are taught that biological evolution is driven by survival of the fittest, but what is fitness in a purely physical
Right,
sense?
it's not just about having the sharpest teeth or being the fastest.
No.
McWhirter argues that natural selection is fundamentally a thermodynamic sorting mechanism. It ruthlessly targets traits that contribute directly to maximizing E, the absolute net energy passed on to the next generation in the form of surviving offspring.
So every living animal is essentially an organic power plant trying to maximize its net energy output into the future before its system degrades.
Yes, and the comparison between the Greenland shark and the bluefin tuna is the most stunning illustration of how wildly divergent evolutionary paths can lead to the exact same mathematical thermodynamic optimization.
Let's set the stage for this. You have two marine apex predators of roughly similar massive body size. On one hand, you have the Greenland shark.
Right.
It lives in the freezing, pitch-black waters of the Arctic. It is incredibly slow, glacial, almost lethargic. It scavenges, and it is believed to live for over 400 years.
A masterpiece of slow metabolism.
And on the other hand, you have the bluefin tuna, the absolute Ferrari of the ocean. It is a warm-blooded, hyper-fast, predatory torpedo that crosses entire oceans in weeks. It lives fast and dies relatively young.
Two massive animals, completely opposite life strategies, polar opposites in every way.
So how do they compare energetically?
Well, the bluefin tuna's strategy for maximizing its energetic output, its E, is to lay millions upon millions of tiny eggs. It invests almost zero energy into each individual offspring, betting that sheer volume and probability will result in a few survivors.
It is the grocery store model of biological reproduction. Massive volume, razor-thin energetic margin per unit.
Exactly. The Greenland shark takes the opposite approach. Its strategy is to produce a very small number of very large, highly developed offspring.
Right.
It invests massive amounts of internal energy into each individual pup, gestating them for years, ensuring that when they are born, they are robust enough to survive the harsh Arctic.
The boutique lemonade stand. High energetic margin per unit, but very low volume.
Yes, and here is where the math makes your jaw drop. Biologists have studied the relationship between body mass and reproduction across a massive spectrum of living organisms.
What did they find?
They discovered a scaling law. Generation timescales predictably with mass to the quarter power.
So the heavier an animal gets, the longer it takes to reproduce, scaling at a precise mathematical rate.
Precisely. And when they run the numbers on the lifetime energetic investment of these two radically different species, factoring in the tuna's millions of tiny eggs over a short life and the shark's few massive pups over centuries, their overall energetic fitness scores are approximately equal to 1.
They both balance out perfectly.
They both score a 1. Despite millions of years of divergent evolution, entirely different habitats, drastically different anatomies, and opposite reproductive strategies, both the lightning-fast tuna and the glacial shark are equally fit survivors, purely based on net energy optimization over deep time.
Nature is an uncompromising accountant.
It ruthlessly penalizes any strategy that doesn't thermodynamically balance out to 1.
If your strategy results in a score of less than 1,
You go extinct. Your species burns more energy than it passes on, and you fade from the fossil record.
and if you score over 1,
If a species discovers an evolutionary hack and scores over 1 temporarily, its population explodes logarithmically.
like an invasive species.
Exactly. It dominates its ecosystem until it hits the absolute physical carrying capacity of its environment. It consumes all available resources, suffers a massive die-off, and is violently forced back down to an equilibrium of 1.
It gives you an absolute sense of vertigo when you apply that logic to us.
It really does.
Humanity found a thermodynamic hack called fossil fuels. We scored well over 1. Our population exploded from 1 billion to 8 billion in an evolutionary blink of an eye.
And now we are hitting the carrying capacity of the environment.
We're hitting the atmospheric and ecological limits of our growth.
It shows that the rules of net energy are not just abstract economic theories or localized engineering problems. They are the immutable, inescapable laws of the universe.
Wow. Let's try to pull all of this together because this has been a truly mind-bending journey. We started by realizing that chasing efficiency ratios like EROI is a trap. We have to secure the absolute net energy surplus to survive.
Right. And we saw how modern finance is sleepwalking, assuming that printing money is the same as printing physical power, ignoring the starvation of the dissipative sectors.
We unpacked the new scientific toolkit, highlighting why PROI exposes the massive energetic drain of building the renewable transition today, and why strict boundaries are the only way to keep the math honest.
We explored exergy, realizing that intermittent wind and solar require vast infrastructural overhaul to mimic the usefulness of dense fossil fuels.
We looked at the macro modeling of the European grid to 2050, proving that geographical isolation forces an inefficient overbuilding of batteries, driving our EROI down to 14, while a continent-wide interconnected grid stabilizes us at 18, safely above the civilization minimum of 10.
And finally, we saw how these exact same thermodynamic laws dictate the future of our agriculture, the rewriting of our legal codes, and the millions of years of evolution that balance the shark and the tuna.
It is a profoundly unifying, unsparing way to look at the world, and it leaves us with an incredibly urgent perspective on our current century.
Nature spent millions of years ruthlessly optimizing the net energy of biological organisms to achieve perfect equilibrium. Everything balances to one in the end.
But humanity is trying to artificially transition our entire civilizational metabolism in just 3 decades. And that leaves me with a final thought I want you, the listener, to mull over.
What's that?
Nature optimized the shark and the tuna based on natural biological limits. But human ambition doesn't seem to have limits. Right now, we are racing to build the energy transition, but simultaneously, we are seeing an explosion in artificial intelligence and massive energy-hungry data centers.
That's a huge wild card.
It leaves you wondering, if the laws of thermodynamics dictate that species who run energy deficits go extinct, what happens if our insatiable technological appetite outpaces our grid's physical reality before we even reach that 2050 baseline? Are we building a sustainable metabolism, or are we engineering a system that demands more calories than the Earth can biophysically provide?
That is the defining question of the next 20 years. Thermodynamics always balances the ledger, whether we are ready for it or not.
If you want to explore the math, the models, and the profound science behind everything we discussed today, and I cannot recommend it highly enough, you need to check out the full text of Net Energy Analysis, The State of the Art. It will permanently change how you see the world. Keep questioning the energy around you, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.